Welcome to Veryhaunted on YouTube, the go-to spot for chilling ghost stories from all over the world. We post twice a week, bringing you true, spine-tingling encounters with the paranormal, from haunted places to mysterious apparitions. Our stories are real, eerie, and unforgettable. Subscribe to dive deep into the world of ghosts and hauntings with us. Hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest adventures in the unknown. Whether you're a hardcore paranormal enthusiast or just love a good scare, Veryhaunted has something to make your heart race. Join us if you dare and explore the shadows together. Subscribe now.
This particular incident happened within the last year, and it just occurred to me to post it. I worked for 18 years as a medic. After that time period, it was beginning to take a toll on my back. There are more back injuries in the EMS field than any other occupation. After I withdrew from working with an ambulance squad, I did home nursing care for 4 years until I got hired where I'm working now. Now I'm a full-time receptionist in a senior nursing facility. Not mentioning the name, it's a statewide organization that has independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, and memory care all within one location. We offer a very wide range of services for the elderly. I work in the independent living area, which is also the main entrance, and the main switchboard to route calls to the appropriate areas. It's located in Westlake, Ohio. The particular road it's on is called Nursing Home Strip due to the fact that there's a long line of nursing homes stretching from Rocky River to Westlake. The area I work in is manned 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. My medical background is what attracted my supervisor's attention when she spotted my application on Indeed. She called me. We set up an interview for the next day. I went there and met her. She seemed very impressed that I was a former medic because there do arise medical emergencies in independent living as there are elderly residents living there. She wanted someone that could address those incidents in a timely manner, but keep a cool head whilst evaluating the situation. I seemed to fit the bill. Unbeknownst to me, I was hired after I left her office. She called the next day to send me to an urgent care office to get a physical. I passed. Yay. The residents that lived there were quick to spot a new face at the front desk. They would introduce themselves and inquire about my name, and the like. They are all very sweet. I really like working there. I seem to have an affinity for working with the elderly. I'm good at it, and I really enjoy helping people. That is why I went into the medical field in the first place. I enjoy helping people. You simply cannot help but get close to those residents after seeing and addressing their needs day in and day out. I'm not an emotionless robot. I'm a person, and I have feelings for them. It's too hard not to. We are to the point that we are like an extended family to them. They're wonderful. This one little lady, Ruthie, was quick to familiarize herself with me. She was especially excited when she found out from another coworker that I was a retired medic. She told me that she was a former registered nurse who used to be the head nurse in a downtown hospital in Cleveland. She was delighted. We had some very enjoyable conversations swapping our medical exploits. She loved talking to me, but she was respectful of the times when I was busy, like when I did the evening dinner welfare checks. She would wait until I was done with them, and come back down to the desk around 8 at night so she could visit with me. She would then bid me a good night and go back to her apartment to get ready for bed by 9. We got very close in the first 3 years I was there. I met her children, grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. They came to see her to take her out frequently. Unfortunately, after those 3 years she began to decline. She was in her late 80s and had several health issues that were getting worse. I hated seeing that happen to her, but it happens to a lot of them that reside there. She went from walking on her own to a walker, and then a motorized scooter. Eventually she wound up over in the skilled nursing facility. She was there for a couple months, and her family would visit her regularly. After those 2 months she passed on during one of my days off. When I got back to work, one of our receptionists informed me of what happened to her. I went into the employee restroom and cried. I pulled myself together by reminding myself that she was in a far better place now with her husband and other loved ones, and no longer suffering. However, I still missed seeing and talking to her. I thought of her often. It was several months later that I was working the evening shift. I was doing my dinner welfare checks. Those that I called that didn't answer their phones I had to physically go check on. Her apartment was rented to a new resident that I had to check on as he did not come down to dinner. None of the other employees had seen him, and he didn't answer the phone when I called. I gathered up my equipment: cordless phone, pager, paper, pen, and master key to enter the apartment if need be. I knocked on the door of 115. No answer. I let myself in. I called out that it was me, and proceeded to do a sweep of all the rooms. He wasn't home. As I was leaving the bedroom and coming back into the living room, there on the couch, as plain as day, was Ruthie. She was sitting there looking as robust as ever. She had a broad smile on her face, and she smiled and waved in recognition of me. I was overwhelmed. I said, "Ruthie, it's wonderful to see you. I miss you." After I said that, she grinned again and gave me a little wink. Then she raised her hand to wave at me again, and then she faded away. I got a little emotional and had to choke back the tears. I thought I was just hallucinating for a moment, and went about finishing my checking rounds. Once I returned to the desk, I had time to sit and evaluate what just happened. I wasn't about to tell my fellow workers about it for fear of them thinking that I was either too short of a six-pack or possibly scaring them. I kept it to myself. Yet I had to ponder about it. I know what I saw. Was it possible that she just came back to see me one last time and assure me that she was all right now? That was the only theory that made any sense to me. Funny thing though, the other evening night shift women that work the desk told me that, for some strange reason, whenever they did the welfare checks in that apartment, that it always felt extremely cold in there. I didn't notice any difference in temperature when I went in there. Now I have to ask, was Ruthie just staying around and waiting for me to come on duty to make the rounds so she could make herself known to me? I didn't see her anymore after that. Almost wish I would, but I realize she's much better off now. I am continuing to develop close relationships with the other residents living there. We even have a couple local famous people living there. However, out of respect for their privacy, I won't give their names. I am something of a senior myself, I admit it. My age is another thing that was in my favor when my boss hired me. She appreciated my background and experience due largely to my age. I, personally, cannot afford to retire, as it were. I have to keep working. One of these mornings, after I've pulled the third shift, someone will come in and find my corpse sitting behind the desk, in front of the computer. Actually, that's not such a bad way to go. Performing my duty, laugh out loud. Seriously though, I enjoy the work I do. However, I never expected the added bonus of seeing a resident that I grew very fond of who passed on, showing up to smile and wave to me. I am very grateful that I met Ruthie, and feel I'm all the better for having known her. Since it is a senior facility I work in, I'm sure I have other encounters waiting for me. Thanks for listening.
This is an incident happened to me when I was about 17 years old, around 1980, give or take. Timelines start running together as one grows older, but the details of this story are as fresh as the afternoon it happened. My father, being in the military, was stationed at the large Air Force base in San Antonio, Texas at the time. My parents had purchased an older house in a long-established neighborhood close to the base. Over the 4+ years we lived there, there seemed to be some strange occurrences that happened off and on. To set up the foundation of the story, I will highlight a couple of things that happened that lead up to my interesting experience some 42 years ago. On a side note, there is supposedly some history surrounding the old neighborhood, i.e., the land was a field hospital for the Mexico Army from the siege of the Alamo, but perhaps that is just a story. The garage to the house was converted to a play living room by the previous owners, but my parents wanted to turn it into a bedroom for my younger sister, who was 5 at the time. She walked into the large room, took one look around, and stated she would not sleep in the room. When my mother asked why, she pointed to the back corner of the room and said a man hanged himself there. Then she left the room. Other things that happened include a woman that seemed to visit my other sister in her sleep regularly. One night when my parents were in bed, a large crashing sound emanated from the kitchen like all the cabinets flew open with all the dishes crashing to the floor. When my parents went to investigate, nothing was amiss. Other times books would open on their own in front of people, and for me only two real things stand out. One was I awoke from a very sound sleep by something, and as I was waking up I saw a solid black figure standing bending by the head of my bed. Needless to say, I was instantly awake and swinging my pillow at it. By the time I was fully awake, nothing was there. I can never be sure if that is what I saw or just one I imagined as I woke up, but something caused me to come out of a sound sleep. We had two dogs that were very protective of the family. One was full chow, the mother named Jess, and the other was half chow, her son named PT. PT was well known in the neighborhood as a very aggressive watchdog for the house, family, and backyard. Occasionally he would escape from the backyard, but he would be happy-go-lucky as he only protected his property, his family. He was a very aggressive dog within his boundaries. Case in point, my father tried to give him to the AF for a canine working dog, but they refused as he is too aggressive. Like all outside dogs, when they both came in the house they were very happy, and anytime the door was open they would not hesitate to run into the house if invited for scratches and snacks. This is very important to keep in mind for the upcoming incident. One early afternoon in the summer I was home alone, and like most teenagers on the weekend with not much to do, I was just lying on the couch eyeing the TV. I could not even tell you what was on, but I do remember that the house was very still. Not something I noticed then, but looking back after it happened and quiet with just the TV providing the sound. All of a sudden there was a huge sharp bang on the back door with PT barking and hitting the door again and again wanting to come in. They had never done this before, and in fact, having enjoyed the company of a number of pet dogs, I had never seen this type of behavior before or since. My initial thought was someone was breaking in at the back of the house through the window, but we had bars on the windows. Remember, this is San Antonio, so if someone was breaking in I should have heard them, plus it was early afternoon. That was my young reasoning at the time. So I opened the back door and PT ran past me without even looking my way, not even stopping for a pat or snack, just zoomed by me to the front of the hallway. Jess was on the back porch whimpering and running in a circle. Again, I had never seen this behavior before. PT had run around the corner to the top of the hallway leading to the back bedroom's bathroom when I heard him growling like a bear, deep and menacing. I tried to get Jess to come into the house, figuring two dogs is better than one, but she refused, and I could not even pull her inside the house as she locked up her legs and refused to move. Hearing PT growling but not barking, I carefully made my way to the kitchen wall so I could peek around the corner to see what was going on, figuring the back door was open if I needed to run, and dog was between me and whatever was in the hallway. I looked down the hallway and there was nothing I could see, but I did notice it was quiet except for the continuous growling, and it was darker in the hallway, like a gloomy day, but only outside the sun was shining bright. PT was standing super still, all his back hair sticking up like he saw something spooky. I wasn't sure what was up, but I felt like PT would have my back if anything weird happened. So I decided to be brave, or maybe just not thinking straight, and walked up to him again. I called his name, but he only looked at me real quick before turning his attention back to the hallway, like he was on guard duty or something. I tried to pet him, but he didn't really care about my hand, just checked it was me and that's it. Then I decided to check out the place myself, walking down the hallway and peeking into the bedrooms on the side, the bathroom, and the bedroom at the end, trying to figure out what got PT all worked up. Everything looked fine, did not see any broken glass or anyone for that matter, and did not notice any cold spots, touching, etc. In the past, the dogs loved to come back to the bedrooms to play and get petted, but PT refused to come down the hallway at all. Even after I called him, he seemed to be looking straight through me. He just kept still at the front of the hall, with his legs in a ready-to-attack stance and the deep, from the belly growling. I tried to grab PT's collar and drag him down the hallway, which he fought by digging his paws into the rug. He just locked his legs but kept right on looking past me at whatever he saw. When I called him and tried to pull him, PT would give me a quick glance, perhaps a hard plead to leave him alone and get out of there quickly. So deciding that it might be time to head to the great outdoors and wait for the rest of the family to return, I started towards the kitchen and open back door when all of a sudden the dog quit growling. I looked back and it looked like he came out of a trance. He shook his head side to side and looked down the hallway. He then became the happy-go-lucky dog he was, wagging his tail and wanting a scratch. At the same time, Jess came into the house as always like nothing was wrong, nothing happened. But as a final period to this story, as PT started to walk away from the hallway, he stopped and looked back down the hallway, which seemed to be not as dark, gave a hard deep growl that lasted a few seconds, and did the things that dogs do when covering up something bad. He used his back legs to kick out down the hallway like he was throwing dirt down that way. Both dogs were their playful self. I am not sure what happened, and I never been one to pick up on that kind of thing, but I can say that was the strangest thing that had ever happened to me until my young daughter was having conversations with something in the corner of our room one night in Korea, but that is another story. But never again did anything happen like that again while we were in the house. Just a strange happening, and sometimes I ponder about what might have happened if the protector dogs had not been there.
Way back in 1972, I was a newlywed to my first husband, Bill. The bum. Feel the love here. We ran away to Kentucky to get married because you could get married there at 16 years old without parental consent. It was 2 weeks after I turned 18 and I could leave Ohio at 18, as that was then considered legal age to do so. A mistake on my part, but I corrected it a few years later. However, that's another story not really appropriate for this site. We were living with his foster parents when we came back to Willoughby. My parents were just glad to see I was alive, but they were less than thrilled with Bill. I grew to understand that later on. At any rate, we were living in Esther's house that was a former boarding house long before I met Bill. One room in the house was haunted by the ghost of a former boarder named Chester, who was an alcoholic and, unfortunately, passed on there. I encountered poor Chester and mentioned him in a previous post about Esther's boarding house. He was merely confused and not aware of his non-living state until I gently explained it to him, thus helping him to move on to a better existence. We lived with Esther and Dave for about 1.5 years, but it was hardly subliminal. We had very little privacy except for up in our bedroom, or when we left every weekend for our playing jobs. We were both guitarists and in a 4-piece band. Our drummer, call her S, was also our manager. That way we always had our manager with us. She would find the gigs and negotiate our pay scales. That was about the only fun I had while married to Bill, since he mostly didn't stay employed too long. He had a problem with work called laziness. Those weekend gigs helped keep us in gas and food, though, for several months until I found employment as a nursing assistant in a nearby hospital. Believe it or not, back then $2.25 an hour was a fairly decent wage, and we were able to move out to our first apartment at last. Ah, privacy. The apartment was once a huge century-old mansion that the owners converted into 8 separate apartments, 4 upstairs and 4 downstairs. We got the one on the far left side in the back facing the street. The rent was only $110.00 a month. Can you believe that? The apartment was so tiny that you could, literally, stand in the center of the living room and turn around slowly and see the entire apartment without leaving that spot. It had the living room, bedroom off of the living room, bathroom off of the bedroom, and the kitchen. The kitchen was the only large section of the whole place. There was a door in the kitchen that led down to the basement, but we never went down there. We had to wallpaper the living room since it was an ugly puke yolk yellow color, and we laid some nice new linoleum down since the floors were bare wood. We didn't want splinters in our feet. I told the landlords that we were doing it to improve the appearance of the place to our liking and didn't expect them to increase the rent as we were doing all the work. They agreed. While we were busy improving the place and setting up housekeeping, we didn't really notice anything right away. Once we had the work completed is when we began to notice some annoying and strange developments. It started out rather subtle at first. We had an apartment directly above us. The other 3 were located in such a way as to have 2 on one side and 2 on the other side. It started with some noises above us, usually in the daytime, no big deal, the sound of the other tenants, or so we thought. Like I said, we didn't give too much credence to it. However, those noises grew louder in intensity, and we heard them day and night, especially when we were trying to sleep. How rude can you get? We took it for months until it got ridiculous. When Bill was at work one day, I took the initiative to call the landlord and say something about it. When I told the wife about the rude tenant above us keeping us up all night with their racket, I was greeted with silence at first. She told me that she'd look into it. I let it go at that. I was hoping that the landlords would have a talk with the person living up there and tell them to be more considerate. No such luck. The racket became much more distinctive at night. It actually sounded like someone rolling something around on wheels. Apparently the floors in all the apartments were bare wood floors, making it easy to hear someone walking around or moving furniture and the like. We also heard what sounded like they were hammering nails into the plaster walls. That noise was sporadic, but most annoying when you're in bed. We knew there were other tenants upstairs, an old man that lived by himself and an older couple. We didn't know who was in the other two apartments. We really didn't neighbor too much. We got pretty fed up with the noisy neighbor above us and decided to go up to the apartment and talk to them ourselves. It appeared that the landlords didn't follow through with their idle promise. Driven by annoyance and sick of being kept up nights, we marched upstairs to confront our tormentor. We resolutely stood outside of the apartment door and persistently began knocking on it. We got no answer. We kept pounding until we'd get a response. About then, the woman that lived with her husband directly across from that apartment opened her door. She looked to be in her 40s, attractive, and spoke nicely to us, inquiring as to what we were doing. We explained that whoever was living in there was keeping us up practically all night with all the racket they were making. I asked, why don't they open the door? Are they deaf so they can't hear all the noise they're making at all hours? What's their problem? We're getting quite aggravated about it. The landlord assured us that they'd talk to them, but nothing's been done so far. She had a rather blank look on her face. She introduced herself and invited us in so she could talk to us. Her husband was at work, but she asked us to sit down. She offered us some coffee. We were seated at her dining room table as she brought the coffee out to us. She had a cup with us. She told us not to think she was crazy, but her husband and her had been hearing the same noises since they moved in the year before us. She said hearing what we said made her realize that what her husband and her surmised convinced her that they weren't just bonkers and hearing things. She said that that particular apartment was empty. Our jaws dropped. Even Bill, the skeptic, was stunned. We told her somebody has to be in there. She confirmed that the only people they've seen in there were the landlord and his wife when they come by once a week in the mornings to clean it. She said that they've seen the landlords showing the apartment to several people, yet no one comes back or has moved into it. She took a deep sip of her coffee and told us with a very serious tone in her voice that her husband and her believed that place was haunted. I asked her if she knew anything as to why it might be haunted. All she could tell me was that the old man that lived down the hall next door might know something since he had been living there for a number of years. She didn't want to question him since they didn't know him personally and weren't sure how to inquire about it. Fortunately, I was a little braver, and the curiosity was more than I could stand. I waited for my day off from the hospital. I did notice an old fellow that would periodically sit out on the front porch when the weather permitted it. The house had a wraparound porch, so I just walked around to the front when I saw him outside one day. I introduced myself and told him that we recently moved in around the back. I started some polite conversation, trying not to be too obvious about my curiosity. I asked him how well he was acquainted with his neighbors, and did he like living there? Things like that. During the conversation, he mentioned that there was a strange old guy that lived in the apartment opposite him at the end of the hallway. He said the man had to get around with a wheeled walker because he had difficulty walking. He thought the guy was a little kooky since he was frequently thinking he had to pound nails into the walls to hang things. He wasn't satisfied with his surroundings and was constantly trying to change it. He told me that the guy was rather antisocial and complained all the time. He said that he was living there for about 4 years when the landlord showed up to collect the rent one day, only to find him lying on the bedroom floor. Apparently, he'd had a heart attack. that was that. It began to make sense. This man quite obviously was not aware that he was, no longer, on the physical plane, and was carrying on with his obsessive habits that he had in life. I imparted my revelation to Bill, and even he couldn't argue with me about it. We stayed less than a year and moved to a much nicer apartment elsewhere. It wasn't much of a beginning for a newlywed couple in their very first place to find out that it was haunted. Our relationship didn't improve too much after leaving, but I couldn't blame a ghost for that. Bill turned out to be lazy and a runaround. The marriage ended, and I met a wonderful man, and the rest is history.
As we wrap up today's eerie adventures, we've shared tales that tingle the spine and tug at the heart. These stories, spanning from comforting farewells to guarding spirits, highlight the unseen threads weaving through our lives. Now it's your turn. Have you ever sensed a presence, felt a pet's unexplained alertness, or discovered a chilling piece of history within your own walls? We're eager to hear your encounters with the unknown. Share your ghostly encounters at veryhaunted.com or leave us a comment below. For more on today's stories, check out the description and join our community of the curious and courageous. Thanks for listening. Stay haunted until we connect again in the shadows.